So I know the sermon title has you at least a little interested, right? So it was easily hands down, the most interesting and best opening line of a sermon that I have ever heard. Have we become a nation of cat vacuumers? You heard it right? Cat vacuumers. Now, my colleague who raised this question, the Reverend Amanda Aikman, goes on to explain, to make sense of that title, she goes on to explain that she has this neighbor named Betty. And Betty, as she explains, is this sweet and kind and gentle neighbor with no remarkable traits except for one. Reverend Aikman says that Betty has a mild form of obsessive compulsive behavior that makes it impossible for her to leave the house in the morning without first dusting and vacuuming every single item in the house. Can any of us relate to that? I see a lot of no's, but I see a lot of people looking at their spouses. Now, besides this, Reverend Aikman goes on to explain the other thing that makes her neighbor Betty unique is that, you see, Betty has a cat. And this cat's name is Reuben. And you see, Betty's husband brought Reuben home one day. He rescued him a few years ago from a dumpster. And so when Reuben arrived in their lives, he was a bit of a mess, with chunks. With chunks, Betty said, of life deep in its fur and pieces of that trash bin he was rescued from, all deep into his fur. And so it only seemed to make sense to Betty to weave Reuben into her daily vacuuming ritual. Now, I want to assure everybody there was no abuse here. She put the vacuum on low, went out and bought a special attachment, a special upholstery attachment, and Betty would remove every last scrap of unwanted refuge from Reuben's now silky and beautiful fur. Now, the trick was, this became part of Betty's regular daily ritual. And after months of this, with Reuben now the cleanest cat in the world, it became unclear to everybody why Betty continued her daily task. But to Betty it was absolutely clear. This is what she said to Reverend Aikman. She said, if I don't do it, then Reuben will just become a mess again, and I just can't take that chance that Reuben will be able to clean himself all on his own. And so I continue this for the same reason I do the rest of my rituals. I just know deep in my heart that if I do not do it, disaster will strike. Now, at this point, I need to say right away that Reverend Aikman, she makes absolutely clear that she does not in any way want the story to be seen as making fun of or making light of Betty or anyone's obsessive-compulsive struggles. She makes it clear that she's not trying to lift Betty up as odd, but rather as oddly more similar to the rest of us than we may want to admit. Not in the sense of literally vacuuming cats. Although if there are a few of you that do that, I'd like to know, because that could make a whole nother really great sermon along the way. No, all of us, Reverend Aikman suggests, take on tasks. Take on tasks that to everyone else around us seem that we could pass on or share or just stop, but to us seem absolutely dependent on our doing it. Like Betty, Reverend Aikman says, we believe somewhere, right, deep down inside our hearts that if I do not do it, disaster will strike. Right? We may not be obsessive compulsive per se, but she says that again, more of us than we'd like to admit are obsessively responsible. Or as my teenager describes it, control freaks. Or at least that's how she describes it when she's describing me recently. Indeed, a couple months back, after watching me put in a few too many hours at work and worry a little bit more than I normally do, she came up to me and in her playfully but sarcastic teenage voice, and she said, "You know, Dad, the world won't fall apart if you put it down for a day." Nice line. Nice line, I said back to her. "There's no way you made that up on your own." I told her, where did you get that? "From my psychology class," she proudly said. "It was a session," she said. "It was a class lesson on the difference between what stresses out and messes up kids' lives and what stresses out and messes up the lives of adults." And then she just strutted away. Now, that exchange, friends, has stuck with me ever since. And actually, this week has led me back to my own psychology books. And there I found something that I think may help those of us who regularly get labeled control freaks feel a little bit better about ourselves. Because it turns out that we are not alone in this. This control freak thing turns out to be a very human thing. It's not just something that a few of us with big egos and big worries have. It's something that seems bred into every single human being's genes. You see, psychologists say that this feeling that the world will just fall apart if I don't stay vigilant and in control of it all is rooted in something they call the human negativity bias. The human negativity bias. Now, it's more complicated than this, but I'll give you just the preacher's version of it this morning. Simply put, back in the Neanderthal days, just as now, we all of us had these parts of our brain that were wired to alert us to danger, and other parts of our brain that were wired to alert us to delight. And some of us way back then had these bigger danger alert centers in our brain, while others of us had bigger delight centers in our brain. And while I'm sure all of us know which type of brain we'd prefer if we were in charge, it turns out that Mother Nature seems to have a mind all of her own. So again, to put it simply, while hanging out, right? While hanging out on the plains or the jungles of Africa, some of us would hear our brain say, "Oh, look, a pretty flower, and we'd go over and we'd sit down and just let ourselves become absorbed in the beauty and blessing of it all." Think Edgar, and when he just shouted out flowers, right? Think Edgar. But others of us would hear this voice in our head say, "Hey, what was that sound over in the woods? What was that shadow in the weeds?" And then we would just run away. Just absolutely run away, leaving the high, alert, scaredy cats among us to live on for another day and pass on our danger-focused genes, while the laid-back and joyful nature lovers among us became the tiger's lunch. And so here we are today. Here we are today with this brain, right? This brain that has blessed us with survival and existence, but has also burdened us with this huge bias. A huge bias that says, heck yes. Heck yes, we can't put the world down or it will eat us for lunch. But here's where the psychologists also say that we have to be careful. A second ago I described our ancestors as scaredy cats, and while that's true, psychologists say we need to realize that this is really only half right. Simply put, as one of my favorite psychologists said, he said, because of our tiger-focused brains, we are not just fearful, we are also blind. Because of our tiger-focused brains, we're not just fearful, we're also blind. And I love the example that this psychologist gives. It's a true story, it's a true example. It actually comes from one of his clients, an older gentleman that sees him for therapy. It turns out that this older gentleman one day was sitting on a park bench reading the the New York Times and a few other magazines, and alongside of him came a younger gentleman and sat down beside him to read, and with his magazines and his newspaper. And after a while, the younger gentleman turned to the older gentleman, and he noticed that the older gentleman had a watch on. So he said, "Excuse me, sir, will you tell me the time?" The older gentleman then just took a deep breath and looked the young man up and down, checked out what he was reading, and then looked him in the eye and said, "I don't think so," and turned away. Now, obviously, right, the young guy was a little bit confused by this, so he turned to the old guy again, and he said, "Excuse me, sir, I don't mean to be rude, I don't mean to be a pest, but look, I noticed you do have a watch on, and I'm just curious why you would not give me the time." And then the older gentleman took a deep breath, and he said, "Well, I looked you up and down, and you're a good-looking fella. And you're a nice guy, very polite, and clearly you're well-read and smart and interested in the events of the world. And so I knew if I gave you the time, we would strike up a conversation. And then tomorrow we'd probably sit together again and strike up a conversation again. And then I would probably invite you out to lunch. And then we would become friends. And then after we became friends, I would probably invite you back to my house. And if I invited you back to my house, you would probably meet my daughter, who is also beautiful and smart. And the two of you would hit it off. And then you would probably ask her out for dinner. And then after a few of those dinners, you would ask her to marry her. And she would say yes. And I will be darned if I'm going to let my daughter marry someone who's not conscientious enough to wear a watch." Not bad. Tiger eyes. Tiger eyes is how he describes that story. Now, I love that story, but I also love the way this psychologist concludes the story. He writes this. He says, the real takeaway, the insight we need to understand if we are ever to become more than Neanderthals and evolve into the humans we need to be, is this. We need to understand that this negativity bias doesn't just mean we've been primed to be fearful of life. It also means we've been primed to never be at rest, to always be on guard and never be at rest. And without rest, he writes, we have no hope of noticing anything but tigers. Without rest, we have no hope of recognizing and seeing anything but tigers. And of course, friends, with that, we come to the true topic of today, which is, of course, the holiday season, right? Because if any time of the year has us primed to be fearful and not at rest, it is most certainly this one. That line from the well-known carol, "The Little Town of Bethlehem," comes to mind. Remember it? The hopes and fears of all the years reside in thee tonight. In other words, this season is just loaded, right? Just loaded. Not just with all the materialism that we usually talk about, but with all of our deepest hopes and fears. For instance, on the fear side, it's virtually impossible at this time of the year, and I think many of us can relate to this in this room. It's virtually impossible at this time of the year for us not to remember and miss those who have died and are no longer at the table, right? Inevitably reinforcing the feeling that life is indeed a tiger that leaps indiscriminately and often without notice. And on the hope side, this time of year with the Scrooge stories, right? Deep in our heads, it's this time with that story in our heads that even the most cynical among us are tempted into believing that with our help, if we just do it right, people can change. Lifetime arguments and tensions can be healed, and if we do it just right, perfect family gatherings are indeed possible. And so our hopes, right? Our hopes and our fears are are just all on full alert. And consciously or unconsciously, we do indeed leap into a lot of cat vacuuming. Leaping, right? Leaping into a lot of cleaning up and controlling every little thing around us, believing that if the holidays are going to work out and disaster is to be avoided, it all depends solely on us. For instance, a friend sat with me the other day, and she shared with me her perfect plan. This is a friend who last year, her holiday season was dominated by the loss of her husband, and it had completely ruined her Christmas. And so this year, my friend said that she's scheduled a wonderful distraction for virtually every single day of the holiday week, with tickets to Jiva, lunch and breakfast dates with friends. She's even signed up for cross-country lessons every single morning of the Christmas season. And with every single minute of her days filled this year, she said she would now have her morning all under control. She was so proud of her plan. Another friend of mine has preemptively wrote her sister just this week a letter saying that she feels that the unspoken rift between the two of them over their parents' will and estate has gone on too long, and that she misses the closeness that she and her sister once shared. And she urged her sister in this letter that this Christmas they put their energy into finally setting aside some time to take a walk and talk about it rather than ignoring it and being fake with each other through the entire Christmas gathering. Again, she was so proud. A perfect plan, she said. Many of my couple friends also, and I'm sure there are some of those in this room, have had a tough year with their teenagers, and so I actually should confess, and so we have sat down with those teenagers and asked them to schedule, just one day, just give us one day during the holiday time to spend with us rather than run off with your friends so we can reconnect and then start over. And finally, another friend of mine who lost his job has decided, that there's no way he's going to let his worries about finances affect his kids this holiday season. And so he's asked his parents for a loan, so at least the Christmas tree and everything around the kids will be exactly the same this year, even if everything else around him is not. And so friends, here's the thing, a sort of confession on my part. When I first heard and had all of these conversations with my friends, there was nothing about them that left me worried. Not at all. But this week, with all this stuff about tiger-focused eyes and cat vacuuming swirling around in my head, then suddenly all these conversations to me have seemed different. And those words of the psychologist keep ringing through my head. We are not just primed to be fearful of life, but also to never be at rest. And without rest, we have no hope of noticing anything but tigers. And I don't think it's just me, right? As you listen to these stories, I hope you see and hear it too. Give me a little bit back. You do see it a little bit too, yes. There is just not a lot of rest scheduled in to these plans. Which means also, if the psychologists are right, there also won't be a lot of sight in those plans and experiences either. For instance, I really do hope that my friend's plan of a packed schedule works out. I hope her Jiva play and all those cross-country skiing lessons do provide some release from the pain of missing her husband, but I suspect that even with all that, a lot of the pain in her heart will still leak out. And so I suspect that pain is what she will still feel and see, kind of the rumbling around in the weeds, so to speak, this holiday season. And I hope my friend's sister will take that walk with her, but if her sister, has not come to terms with that argument already, I doubt that 1 hour of Christmas magic will really melt or change her view. And so I worry that argument, I fear that argument will remain dominant in my friend's eyes. And those teenagers, right? Oh God, we can all hope. We can all hope, but odds are, even if they do agree to spend that day with us, they're going to spend that day, every single minute of it, texting on their phone, right? And that tiger will be all that we see in our eyes, and at least one of the parents looking at that will spend the whole day arguing about that. And I suspect my other friend's tree, packed full with presents, may work on some level for his kids, but I really doubt that it's going to heal him. And so I think his hurt still, if he focuses on it, will still be the thing that just dominates the entire space of the day. And so I find myself today, now, oddly not rooting for my friends and their plans at all. Not a single bit. Instead, I find myself wishing for them an entirely different gift this holiday season. There's been a voice that just kept rumbling and rambling around in my head, and it's been this: put it all down. Put it all down is the voice that I keep hearing. Do nothing. Do nothing. Your worries and fears, your hopes and your perfect plans, just let them be. And just for once, let yourself be still. Put down your vacuum and rest. And rest. Of course, by rest, friends, this morning, I'm not talking about the kind of rest we usually think of, not the rest of rest up and re-energize, but the kind of spiritual rest that I do indeed believe allows us to see, allows us to take a wider view, the kind of rest where we intentionally put down all our doing and control and allow life to do something to us, to grab our attention and cause us to notice all that it is already doing and has done simply in our lives. We forget sometimes, I think, that the Christmas story is really a story about people not getting the blessing they wanted, but having to open their eyes and hearts to a blessing that came in a package they did not expect and certainly was not of their own making. Those of us who grew up in the Christian tradition, we already know this, right? We know that the Christmas story, a big part of it is that the people were waiting for a Savior King, right? A Savior King who would come down with swords and power and fire and take control of everything. But what they got was simply this babe whose mission on earth was to tell them that your blessings are already here. You just need to put down your particular and preferred hopes and look around. It's a line from a poem by one of my favorite poets, David White, and it goes like this. It says, I mourn for all those wasted years, all those years of forgetting how easily you can belong to everything simply by stopping. How easily you can belong to everything simply by stopping. I love that, and it reminds me of the line that I've used a number of times in my sermons around here, and you're probably going to hear it a number of times more, over and over again. We can't always get what we want, but we most certainly can want what we have. Which finally brings me back around to those friends of mine, and of course to all of us here today. Whether my friend, whether or not my friend goes on that walk with her sister, what I really hope most for her is that my friend will have the wisdom to make room and sit still long enough to notice that unplanned and unexpected moment when her sister will laugh and likely tell some silly story about back when they were kids. And in hearing that, I really hope my friend again has the wisdom and the sight to put down her tiger eyes and receives the blessings of remembering all the Christmases before when things went right. When things went right, and how that bond of things going right between her and her sister can never, ever really be broken. And when those teenagers, right, when those teenagers of ours do text their friends all day and just whine about being with us, I hope that at least one of the parents in that group will have the wisdom to just pause and breathe and let life remind us that the true blessing of parenthood is not always to be your child's best friend, but instead to simply and wondrously have a front row seat that allows us to watch the story of their life unfold. And when those high-priced presents purchased on loan by my friend are ripped open in less than a moment, I really hope that my friend has the wisdom to quietly notice the next truly important moment, not of his own making, the one where everyone is laughing and just being together, and how no lack of money or employment can ever take that away. And then, of course, there's all of us. I hope, friends, I really do, simply, I hope we too put it all down. And in the midst of our own intentional silence and stillness, rest and release of control, I hope we too have the wisdom to remember what is maybe the most important holiday message of all, that the world does not rest on our shoulders or in the perfect use of our vacuums, but is instead waiting for us to rest within the blessings of its embrace. And so, happy holidays, my fellow cat vacuumers. May your coming days be full of rest and all that is already there waiting for you. May it be so. Amen.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.